Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Is it Happy New Year time, Bruce? I guess it's Happy New Year time.
Probably, yeah. It'll probably be after New Year's that we do our next podcast, so it's Happy New Year time. Happy New Year, David.
Happy New Year, Bruce. Let's hope it is a happier New Year.
I have an old saying every New Year. I say, "May it be better than the last." And this year, that's a mighty low bar to clear. But in the non-zero chance that we don't clear it, trouble.
Well, I can't confirm this, but my wife just told me she was reading a news report that AstraZeneca, which is one of the pharmacy companies producing vaccine, says I think it was by April, April or June, they're going to have 700 million doses. Mm-hmm. So my hope has been that there's going to be this huge glut of vaccine so that anyone who wants to get vaccinated can get vaccinated in the first half of the year, which would be fantastic. Bruce, we got the World Junior Tournament going on in the safe haven bubble of Edmonton and the downtown Marriott Hotel. And there's a couple Oiler prospects who have played, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. So we will talk about those two players. We will talk about the signing of a depth defenseman, Slater Koekkoek, for the Edmonton Oilers. There's a little bit of controversy around them because there's a little bit of the old stats debate coming up. So we'll dig into that a bit around Koekkoek. And we will finally talk about the Athletics' Dom Luszczyszyn, who is a very astute hockey writer, I find. And when it comes to use of advanced stats, one of the people that I find does a really swell job with it and is always interesting. So he came out with his analysis of the Edmonton Oilers for the coming season, and we'll talk about that as well. Let's start out, Bruce, talking. Is that the cat? I hear the bells.
That's the cat.
Is it Santa?
I locked her in a different part of the house, but apparently that door has been opened, and the ship is sailing. Sorry.
The Broberg. Let's start. Mm-hmm. So Holloway. Let's start with Holloway because there's a little bit of he played the first game, and you wrote a report about that. I'll just give my quick take. I thought he was fine. Like I thought he was really fast. Man, he's fast. So he's not as skilled as some of the forwards on the ice. Clearly, he's not as skilled as some of the highest end skill guys. Mm-hmm. He's as fast as anyone, if not faster than anyone on the ice, Bruce. In a fast game, he looked fast. So, I mean, the only guy that I thought looked as fast as him was Byram, who's also super fast. But Holloway charging in there like he did, just charging all over the ice and just showing that speed, that was very, very, very encouraging, very sweet to see. What did you think of the player?
Yeah, well, he only played one of the first two games, and then he missed last night. He was a late scratch with a upper body injury, which may or may not be a head or as opposed to, say, a shoulder injury. But he was involved in a tremendous amount of contact in the first game, probably more than almost any other Canadian player, and he was on the receiving end of a fair bit of it. Because he likes to go where angels fear to tread, and he goes there fast, and he doesn't shy away from going after a puck that's maybe 40-60. Anyway, his speed impressed me, but what impresses me in concert with his speed is the fact that his feet are always moving. He doesn't stand around. He doesn't glide. He's always on the move. And his skating is a real superior strength in that he's got what the scouts call the four-way skating, right? He can transition easily from forward to backward. So when his team has the puck and he's getting open for a pass, he naturally will turn, even though he'll backpedal away to open up a passing lane or whatever. He's always facing the puck and making himself available for the pass. And he plays straight ahead hockey. He'll dump it in and go in and and bring the physicality along the end wall. But he has the capacity of making good plays with the puck. Like, I'm not sure there's a high level of creativity in the player, but he can make and take a pass, as Low Tide says, and he can uh, he made some good plays circling the net with the puck and holding it and waiting for the lane to open up and then putting it in there. And uh, he was on a very strong line, playing left wing on a line with Dylan Cousins and Alex Newhook, both of whom had very big games for Canada. They also scored some points on the power play. And Holloway's special team duty was on the penalty kill, where he was on a duo, the first penalty kill duo with Jacob Pelche. And as I suspected, on the penalty kill, they used him as the face-off man. So even though he's playing left wing at even strength, on the penalty kill he was taking face-offs and winning them. Mind you, winning them against an overmatched, understaffed, seriously compromised German team that really had no chance in this game. This was one of the biggest mismatches that I can remember in recent years in terms of the one team having literally no hope of winning the game. The German team reduced to 16 players compared to 22 for Canada. And the Germans having played their hearts out the day before in their first game against Finland, and they had not much left in the tank, and Canada just took it to them. So it's very hard to draw a real solid judgment off this game, other than you can see things like, Holloway's energy level, his skating, and his commitment to, moving his feet all the time. Doesn't matter who you're playing, that's something you want to see, and we saw it. So
he led the team in ice time, I understand.
He led the forwards in ice time, 15 minutes and
Forwards.
55 seconds. It's they really spread it around. Of course, they had 13 forwards, so they were able to, it wasn't just the normal 15 minutes each kind of split that you'd expect with rolling four lines. So he was marginally ahead, but it wasn't like he got hurt in that game and they curtailed his ice time. In fact, the play that he may have got hurt on, as TSN identified, was the play where Braden Schneider, took a 5-minute major game misconduct and 1-game suspension for a headshot on a German. I really was cheesed by that, I have to say, because I thought of all the games, I know Canada comes out and they're pumped in the first game and they're going to be running around, boys will be boys kind of thing. But that was a game where sportsmanship had to be number one on the list. They were playing a team that was, well, I'd say decimated, but decimated means you've only lost 1/10 of your troops. Germany had lost like a third of their players, 9 players removed from their roster for health reasons. And they're barely going with minimum staff. You can win the game handily by playing keep away. You don't need to run them. Anyway, Braden Schneider decided to run a guy, and the collateral damage was when he hit the guy in the head, the guy's helmet hit Dylan Holloway, collateral damage also in the helmet, head-to-head clash. And it may be that Schneider wound up hurting his own teammate in this collision. It was one of several collisions involving Holloway, so they were guessing, but it was head-to-head. You could see it on the film, and I've got the tweet embedded in the post where you can look at it yourself if you like.
Yeah, I've been looking, I've been on the lookout for reports that he's practicing with the team, because I hope to see that. Mm-hmm. I was a little bit worried, like, that he was just benched, and this was a bit of an excuse. But if he indeed played the most ice time of any forward, that conspiracy theory can go out the window, because that's a clear signal that the coach trusts this player, and he's an absolutely vital cog in the team. Bruce, he struck me as a glue player. Mm-hmm. He will fit in very well. He'll put pressure on the puck and the puck carrier. And when you're a coach in hockey, like, that's what you're hoping for with so many forwards, that they just get on that guy, put pressure on that player. Because when you put pressure on the player, good things happen, mistakes are made. And that's Holloway. And I could see him with McDavid, honestly, keeping up to McDavid and charging in there with McDavid and putting pressure on the defenseman, and, McDavid coming in and feasting on the stray pucks that result from that. So, that's a bit of projecting on my part, but that's what you have to do with your first round draft pick. That's what you're hoping to see. And like, I know that as an Oilers observer, I'm looking for good things, right? So the bad penalty that he took or the turnover that he made, I'm thinking, oh, that's just could happen to anybody. And I'm looking for the good stuff, and I'm hoping beyond hope that this player is going to turn out, because so much is invested in these first picks. You need them to turn out. But I do think even a sober observer of his game would hopefully say notice some of the things that we're noticing, and
Right.
Be positive about this player. What would you give him on a scale out of 10 for that game, Bruce? What would you have given him?
I graded him a 7 out of 10, and I mean, for a guy who got one secondary assist in a 16-2 win, well, you had a whole team full of eights or nines, maybe, but no, I don't think that was, his role is, like when he was penalty killing, which he did a lot, and that 5-minute major and the play that he may have got dinged up by the time they got through the task of assigning the major, sending the guy off to the penalty box, and so on. He was actually out to take and win the face-off to begin that 5-minute shorthanded situation, and he and Pelche took 3 shifts during those 5 minutes and got the job done. So a lot of his role was defensive in nature. I did like his, in addition to the pressure on the other team, his puck support, his positioning. I already mentioned him often facing the puck, but also just being in good position, being the next wave that if when the Germans beat the forechecker, they would then run right into Darren Holloway as the second wave because he was, well placed and seems well aware of defensive things. A couple of small bobbles, but really no obvious deficiencies in his game. I thought he had a strong game.
So Philip Broberg has played one game as well. He had 3 assists.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them were kind of secondary assists, very, very
Yep.
secondary-ish. But one of
Mm-hmm.
them, he moved into the slot very nicely and got off a dangerous shot, which the rebound off the boards was put into the net.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of superlatives I noticed online
Ooh.
about Philip Broberg's game. To me, we've been watching him for some time now. So a few things stood out to me watching that game and the Canadian game. We've been watching a lot of European hockey, Bruce,
Yes.
and it just hit me over the head. It is such a different game.
Mm-hmm.
It is played differently. The tactics are different. The pace is different. The speed is way different. Even though these are just major junior players, as opposed, you'd think that the men of the Swedish Elite League are faster players than the World Junior players. I would think, but it looked so much faster on the small ice surface. Everything is compressed and sped up, and Broberg's game really suits. He's fine on the big ice. It seems to suit the small ice though just fine.
Mm-hmm.
He just he was playing a lower level of competition, I think, than he plays in the against the
Oh,
Swedish men.
sure.
But he had one of his better games. He had a typical Philip Broberg game. When he's on his game, he's dominating the puck. He's making plays. He's shooting here, there, and everywhere. And he looked good. And Bruce, one final thought that I have on Broberg and Klefbom. When the Oilers drafted Broberg, there was a lot of criticism that they didn't take a forward because there was a feeling that the Oilers lacked depth at forward. But I wonder if Oilers management, this is one of the things you always have to keep in mind when you're trying to rate, they have information that we don't have. And I wonder I think they've known for some time that Oscar Klefbom's shoulder is an iffy proposition in the short term and long term. And I wonder if that wasn't one of the factors of them thinking, man, in a year or two, we are likely going to need someone who can step up in case Oscar can't go. And that pick was made with that knowledge firmly in mind. So,
Well, that's a good question. It was 2019. It was 18 months ago.
yeah,
But Cliffbaum's issues with his shoulder go back longer than that, and it
much longer.
seems to be the same one that's cropping up. So Broberg, to me, in his first game, I mean, the 3 points, it was 1-1 after the first period, and then he set up all 3 goals Sweden scored in the second period, and they cruised from there. He didn't play much in the third, but in the second, he was all over the ice. The assists were almost incidental, but his overall play I thought was pretty outstanding. With a couple of bobbles again. I mean, these are 19-year-old kids we're talking about. They make mistakes, but he didn't make many, and he made up for the ones that he did make. And he won so many races to the puck. He made so many good poke checks. He took guys out of the play, and just generally was a dominant force out there. With his size, his reach, especially his speed. Uh, he's a hard man to beat in a one-on-one, and the Czechs weren't doing it on his watch really. And uh, I just thought overall he played a very strong game. He won the Player of the Game award and earned it. And he had the announcers, especially Craig Button, just raving about him throughout the game. And watching his shifts again last night, I noticed the beginning of the second and third period started with a close-up of Philip Broberg, and the commentators just singing his praises as to how good he looked out there. So for what that's worth, I mean, Craig Button is an effusive guy, as we all know, and
I really like Craig
I'm a
Button's
fan of Craig Button
entertainment,
myself.
just for entertainment value.
Hmm.
He's an interesting commentator, right? He's not boring. So
He's not boring.
that's something to be. He passes the first test. It's like Burke, not boring. These people
Brings the
who have
passion.
these people who have been GMs often are pretty articulate
Hmm.
and also have a lot of experience. Button's an interesting character in terms of Broberry because he rated him. I think one of the highest ratings in that draft year was from Button for Broberry. He
Right.
was seventh, I think, had him seventh
Mhm.
on Button's list. But then a year later, when he did his mid-season rankings,
He was missing in
Broberry
that.
was missing from the top 50 prospects outside of the NHL. Like he had
Mhm.
suddenly had some major questions on him, and which fair enough. Like I'm not gonna. Maybe it was based on a World Junior tournament last year where he was slotted in. It's kind of a bottom pairing depth defenseman. Don't make a mistake role. Now he's being asked to lead the team and to be a prime mover in the game and is getting power play time, penalty kill time, and even strength time. And yeah, I'm not surprised by his strong play, Bruce. This is exactly what I would have expected from him. I mean, we've seen him do spectacular things in many games, many
Yep.
times in many games against adult players in Sweden this year. He has that ability to play the Serge Savardian style of dominant game, even against men in Sweden this year. We've seen it, coupled with really weak games and where he's seems to lack confidence and doesn't do well. So this is why I'm glad to hear that he's going back to Sweden after this
Hmm.
World Junior tournament is over. He's just headed right there, so I think that's the right call and could change, but I don't expect that it will.
Yeah. Well, he's had. This is his third World Junior. Uh, we saw him originally here in Edmonton at the 2018 Hlinka Gretzky Cup, where Sweden won the silver medal, and Broberry had a very strong tournament. And that following spring, he was a gold medalist and tournament all star in the U18 tournament that followed that 2018-19 season, just before Oilers drafted him. But he's also played now this is his third World Junior. He's a captain of Team Sweden, and as you said, playing in all situations. He got one assist in each of uh, power play, shorthanded, and even strength in the game on Boxing Day. And they're clearly heavily relying on him. And they have three first round draft picks on their defense with his regular partner, and he was playing right defense mostly at even strength. Broberry with Thomas Bjornfot, for a later first round pick with LA Kings. And they also have Victor Soderstrom, who's their first power play defenseman, more of an offensive guy than Broberry is. So they have got a nice, as usual, Sweden in defense.
Their defense
That's
looks good, doesn't it? Like
uh,
those guys can all sling that puck around, all very
mhm,
confident. Soderstrom's a very confident player with the puck,
yes, yeah, he made a
and
couple of great passes.
yeah, he's a different kind of player
Hmm.
than Broberry. But and we'll see whose game translates best to the NHL. I have a pretty good feeling that Broberg's game is going to be just fine in the NHL. Probably sometime next season, Bruce. I don't see him being in the minors long at all, honestly. I could see him making the Oilers out of training camp next year and being on the third pairing. If that's where he is, I mean, behind, let's say, Jones and Nurse, that's a pretty strong left side of the defense all of a sudden. And that's not counting on Oscar Klefbom. And who knows what's going to happen there. Bruce, the Oilers made a signing. Slater Koekkoek, 26-year-old defenseman who played for Chicago and impressed some people. I can't, honestly, when I watch the Oilers versus another team, I'm so focused on the Oilers that I don't really have a strong assessment of Koekkoek from those games. And my general tendency now is, if I haven't seen a player a lot,
right,
in terms of a trade or a signing, I try to force myself to assign to not make up my mind, to have no opinion on the player coming in. Obviously, you can see if they sign a first line center or you can see like Dominic Cahoon's points stand out. You can see Kyle Turris's career, like a general census, but not anything that I'm wedded to. I don't try to, here's my line, and like I'm standing on this mountain and saying Slater Koekkoek is this as a player, and because I don't know what he is as a player,
right,
and I'm not prepared based on the existing stats to say he's anything. The numbers, the stat that I will go with more than anything else is time on ice. How much have his coaches trusted him as a player? Various coaches overtime in the NHL. How much have they trusted him in overtime, on the penalty kill, at even strength, and on the power play? I'm going to put the most weight in that kind of analysis. And by that analysis, I believe Koekkoek has always been kind of seen by his coaches as a third pairing defenseman, seventh D, sixth D. There was some talk from Mike Kelly, who's a stats analyst out of Chicago before the Oilers series, that Koekkoek and his partner Olli Mata had been responsible for a huge number of grade A scoring chances against with the Blackhawks, and were part of a very porous defense in Chicago. On the other hand, there's on-ice stats analysis of Koekkoek, which suggests that he's a pretty good hockey player. If you go by goals for percentage or Fenwick for percentage,
right.
There's if you go by, I did a ranking, Bruce, of all NHL defensemen last year based on goals for percentage, Fenwick for percentage, and X goals for percentage, which is expected goals for percentage based on the kind of shots that they're out for there on the ice. And Koekkoek ranked, I think, 62nd in the entire NHL if you go for these on-ice stats. So there's people who put a lot of weight in those stats, are very excited about this signing and think the Oilers have gotten a diamond in the rough here. So, hey, maybe that's correct. I'm not going to say it, but I'm not going to invest myself in that opinion or even Mike Kelly's assessment that Koekkoek's going to be a bit of a disaster on defense. I'm going to wait and see the player.
Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, I read your quotes of Mike Kelly stuff in your post, and it seemed a little bit harsh. I mean, Chicago as a team, sure, they got blown up, but Koekkoek's stats relative to his team were actually really good. He had way better shot and dangerous Fenwick numbers against all three levels of competition. He did play over 30% of his minutes against elite competition, so it's not like he was heavily sheltered. I mean, the ice time says he was a third pairing guy, and that's basically what the Oilers signed him to be. But, he's a 26-year-old D-man with 150 NHL games under his belt. Last year, he was a healthy scratch for much of the early part of the season, and I went through his news reports on RotoWire, and somewhere around January, the coach was quoted as saying he's just playing too well. I can't keep him out of the lineup anymore, and he basically played the whole rest of the way, including all 9 of their playoff games. And we got a belly full of the guy, frankly, in the Chicago Edmonton series. He played really well in that series, I thought, and he was a, a thorn in Edmonton's side. He scored points, and got a goal and 2 or 3 assists in that series. And he was in a year and a half in Chicago since being traded there from Tampa Bay. He was traded for Jan Ruta, who's a pretty good defenseman who Tampa Bay just re-signed. And 2 years in Chicago, he was a plus player both years, and an earned plus player in that he did that at 5-on-5. And Chicago was not a good team. Any kind of a plus is unexpected on a team like that. 2 years in a row, he was an outscorer, and again in the playoffs, +4 in the 9-game playoffs, down all of that against the Oilers. But by shot metrics, by goal metrics, um, pretty good. And he's a former. Just let me see when they seem to recall he was a high draft pick. Yeah, 10th
First,
overall.
10th overall in 2012.
2012.
That's Yakupov, the Yakupov draft.
Yeah, that's the year they had, was it 8 defensemen in the top 10? Ryan Murray and Griffin Reinhart, Morgan Riley, and all those guys.
So the Oilers would have been better served to draft
Lindholm.
Slater Koekkoek that year than Nail Yakupov.
Well, it took him a long time to make it. He was one of these late blooming defensemen, to say the least. And in fact, his career high in games played is only 42 games that he played last year. So he's played a lot of half seasons until now, and he's gradually been working his way up. But I mean, if the Oilers assigned him to be a 7th defenseman, he's a well-proven one. If they drafted or picked him to be a 6th defenseman, he's a improving one. As a 6-7, I don't know how much better they could do than that, and they got him at a pretty cheap price, $850,000. I like the signing, and so I mean, I have to say that way back in October when the teams were qualifying players or not qualifying them just before free agency opened. And there was a lot of kind of surprising guys that didn't get qualified. And I remember going through that list and writing a post before unrestricted free agency opened. And I picked out 2 guys that I thought that had been that hadn't been qualified, that surprised me, that I thought could help the Oilers. And I named Dominic Cahoon and Slater Koekkoek. So I'm kind of chuffed about that. That worked out rather well. They both wound up signing with the Oilers.
I'm surprised they gave him a contract as opposed to a PTO, but maybe it speaks to some it speaks to some competition to get the player here. Maybe they felt another team was going to offer him a contract. So I think 2 things at the same time. I think depth, you cannot have enough NHL depth at defense because players do tend to get injured, and that holds for this year. So you bring in another depth defenseman. He's not on a big contract. It's not like, let's say, like, my fear is that he's another Mark Fane, like someone with good on ice numbers when you sign him and he turns out to be a guy who can't really play in the NHL at all. Mm-hmm. But this doesn't matter because he's just a depth defenseman. So if he does turn into that, they don't have to play him. And it's great to have that depth. My only other thought was, I like William Lagesson as a player, and I like Theodor Lennström as a player. We've been watching them in Sweden. Lennström, I think, is a very good bet to be able to play in the NHL in the next couple, help out. And Lagesson's been working his way up the organization for a long time, 7 years as a prospector. Since 2014, right? He was drafted 6 years, 7 years as a prospect. And I just felt a little bit bad for Wild Bill, who's put in all this time. He's finally ready to be that depth D-man, and they bring in Slater Koekkoek. But on the other hand, this is the NHL. This is the way it goes. It's not an easy league to make, and such is life. And for the organization, from the organizational perspective, you need to bring in a depth D-man. Chris Russell took a step back last year, Bruce. He didn't play as well, I thought, last year as he had played in the 2 or 3 previous seasons for the Oilers. He's now 34. You've got to cover yourself. You've got
Yeah.
to be ready in case Chris Russell can't go and or is out. And so the Oilers, they did that. So I'm good with the signing in that way.
Well, they've only got 4 D-men with 100 NHL games under their belt. Well, now they got 5. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
have a little bit more NHL experience in there, and still young experience. This is still an improving player, and you know this is a sign that could work out well. But at minimum, I mean, Mark Fane, who I have a higher opinion of than you do, uh, but he was, I mean, that contract was a disaster. 4 years at 3.5 million, and they wound up eating the last 2 years of it while he played in the minors. Well, 1 year at $850,000. I mean, you can waive that, and you don't have any. You don't have to bury anything. Like or you can bury the whole thing. You don't have to carry any salary. So the risk level is very, very low, and
There's
it's just depth.
more. It's an example of Cates being willing to spend his money, isn't it? Because
Hmm.
if he's got a one-way contract, they're paying him this money. So whether he's playing or not, Daryl Cates has just shown again that he's willing to step up and pay for the Edmonton Oilers. I think that's the biggest. This is more. I take that as good news. We don't know the financial situation of various owners heading out of the lockout. One assumes, like, the stock market's gone crazy, so one assumes that many rich people are just doing just fine. So I'm a little less worried. I just have a little bit of, like, in terms of the Edmonton Oilers owner, I don't like having money. I just have a little bit of PTSD, Bruce. I don't know why. It might have to do with a certain August day back in 1988 that I have this thing that won't go away. This sense of doom and gloom and anxiety about how much money an Edmonton Oilers owner has. But this again, one more indication that Cates is going to continue to do what he's done since he took over the team, and that is spend as much as he can around the edges to improve this team. So that's one good signal from this signing.
Right, and I mean, their guys they're signing now are dirt cheap as NHL contracts go. I mean, this morning we had Corey Perry sign in Montreal. Corey Perry, $750,000 1 year contract. I mean, the values have gone down to even below the 1 million. 1 year, 1 million has sort of became the standard show me contract in recent years. It's now become 1 year, 800,000 or NHL minimum, even that. But to me, the contracts that Ken Holland has signed since the pandemic have been fairly frugal, and he's gotten players at either at heavy discount from what they got before, or at a very minimal raise when it's clear that a raise was coming. Like Tyler Ennis, after a very strong season, he got a raise from 800,000 to 1 million. Well, that's not going to break the bank, and there was no sort of real over the top. I mean, as you've mentioned many times, they tried to get Jacob Markstrom, but they didn't. So you can't, you can say they fouled it off as opposed to struck out on that one. But the contracts that they have signed, have been very reasonable. And I mean, they haven't got much cap space, and he's used what he has to the best. But at a certain point, I mean, this isn't $850,000 new money on the cap, because at such time as Slater Koekkoek makes the team, somebody else doesn't. So it just replaces another salary on the roster. So it's extra money out of Daryl Cates' pocket, though, as you point out.
Indeed. So the Montreal Canadiens have signed Corey Perry. I like that was an interesting move, Bruce, that Tampa made. Essentially, I see the move is when you're moving out salary like that and bringing in injured players who aren't going to play, what you're doing is moving out Braden Coburn and Cedric Paquette, and using the money that you would have paid for them and using it to sign. They've signed Mikhail Sergachev. They got to sign Cirelli signed. I think they.
Yep, 3 years, 4.8 million for Cirelli.
Anthony Cirelli. So they've signed these players. They had to find cap space for them, and they've moved out live salary cap, for dead salary cap. It won't count against the cap, the players they brought in. So good move by Tampa Bay. They
lost.
Go
They
ahead.
lost Kucherov for the season with a
Is he gone for sure?
regular season with a hip issue. Yeah, they think he's out for the regular season, and he should conveniently be ready right around game 1 of the playoffs. Yeah, and the other one that's because it happened a long time ago, but the other money they're trying to find is for Vasilevsky, who they had him on a 3-year bridge at 3.5 million that expired last year, the year that he won the Stanley Cup, and early last season he signed a long-term extension at 9.5 million, a $6 million raise. So they had to find some way to fit him under the cap. So Julien Brisebois had his work cut out for him this summer, and he's found a fairly inventive way of dealing with it, trading for Marian Gaborik, who's, I can't remember when he last played a game, but some time ago he had a contract that is still has 1 year left in it, but he's been hurt and unable to perform for quite some time. But that's a fairly sick way of dealing with what was a massive headache for the Tampa GM.
Indeed. So Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic, who is, again, a strong writer over there, uses stats in an interesting way. He's working through the NHL and giving his forecast for each team today. He hits on the Edmonton Oilers. And Bruce, it's largely positive news. He sees the Oilers with a 65% probability of making the playoffs, according to his model. And he sees the team getting 64 points, 64.1 points in this 56 game season, winning more games than they lose is how he's calling it. And I thought, so when I read what people from outside the market have to say about the Oilers, we are hyper focused on the Oilers. I'm hyper focused on the Oilers. So I'm looking to see, how many clangers they have in their analysis.
Right.
Where do they get it wrong? At least according to my opinion of the team. Where are they completely out to lunch? And I have to give Dom credit that I didn't see clangers in his analysis of the Oilers. He seemed, so maybe what I'm saying is his view of the team matched up with my own view of the team. But there was a few astute comments, like, he's saying Koskinen's a pretty decent goaltender, and that's not something that we hear even from some people in the local market. There tends to be, this is people in the same breath, Bruce, will go on about, how the Oilers missed out maybe on Jacob Markstrom, and Jacob Markstrom is this, would have been a big signing for the Oilers, and then they'll downgrade Koskinen. Well, these are two goalies who had almost the identical save percentage in the regular season last year. So Luszczyszyn was saying he thinks Koskinen's actually a little, indicated he's a decent goalie, and the real problem on the team is team defense. Mm-hmm. This is a team that's going to score a lot of goals, he says, but needs to have a greater commitment to team defense if they want to win. And I think that's right. I think Dom is correct about that the Oilers last year had some real issues on defense, and people are some of those issues quite rightly were pointed out around some of their best players, McDavid and Draisaitl, who had, if nothing else, had a stretch of about 6 weeks in late November and early December, or through December, where their defensive game absolutely fell apart. And they were leaking, and they were responsible individually for grade A scoring chances and goals against their team. Now, it's not all on them, but
no, of course not.
They, some of the defensemen needed to play better. Clefbaum was inconsistent. Darnell Nurse had his moments where he was inconsistent. Ethan Bear had some moments where he wasn't quite up to it, although Ethan Bear was generally up to it. Adam Larson had a bad start to the season and then came on strong. Yeah. So there was players, I would say, the players who got the most ice time on the Edmonton Oilers were up and down defensively. And it would be great this year if they were a lot more consistently up than down. And Bruce, I have high hopes, and I think a reasonable expectation that that's going to happen, because McDavid and Draisaitl are finally pegged in as centers on their own line. They weren't going to be confused switching positions around, even on the same shift. Who's covering the slot? I don't know. You got it? Maybe. No, I don't know. Maybe not. When the goal's scored against, they're going to be D prime movers defensively as centers on the forward line when they're out on the ice. That's their job. And I think that that's going to have a big impact on them in terms of knowing their job and executing their job.
Yeah, well, Draisaitl responded very, very well defensively after he got moved into the middle on New Year's Eve last year,
Correct.
and he was much stronger as a defensive player, as a full time center, as opposed to Rover or whatever it was that he was. And the other thing, you mentioned guys who slumped in December. Well, Mike Smith's name has to go near the top of that list as well, of a
Yeah.
guy whose game fell apart for a time. So anytime it seemed like a mistake was made, the darn puck wound up in the net. And so, that certainly magnified some of that issue. But the Oilers, for all they had that brutal December, they still wound up middle of the pack, 15th in the league in goals against, and they had they were much better than that. I think they were from January 1st to the end of the season, 10th in goals against and second in goals for. So I mean, they certainly can produce the goals and the realignment of the forward lines. I mean, I've mentioned this many times. To me, that was the turning point of the whole season when they did that split, and they got the buy-in from those guys, and the whole team really sort of picked it up and turned it around from that point forward. And hopefully, that's the 2020 version of the 2019-20 Oilers that is the dominant one that carries forward into 2021.
Dom was also quite excited by Tyson Barrie's signing. And what he says is, quote, the lack of elite zone exit talent is a real issue in Edmonton, where there are too many defenders who lack the skills to move the puck out effectively. It's why I was a big fan of the addition of Tyson Barrie on a cheap one-year deal. He'll be the best offensive defenseman McDavid or Draisaitl have ever played with, unquote. Mm-hmm. So this is when I thought, okay, Dom, you really are on top of the Oilers because you identified, this is what Alan May from the Washington Capitals, who's an analyst, also identified with the Oilers in the playoffs, is this team just still was not moving the puck out well from their own zone, and they had too many guys. And listen, I'll name them: Matt Benning, Chris Russell, and Adam Larsson were the three guys in the bottom end who really struggled at times to move the puck. And then Nurse, Klefbom, and Bear also in the playoffs. What I was hoping is that from Klefbom, Nurse, and Bear from going to being the best puck-moving D-men on the team would be slotted down where the Oilers could actually get three puck-moving defensemen who were better. Now that hasn't happened, but they got one guy in Barrie who's he's taking essentially Benning's spot on the roster, and he is he's going to be so much better than Matt Benning. Matt Benning, for all that he offered as a NHL hockey player, and he is an NHL hockey player, was at best an average, mediocre puck-moving defenseman for the Oilers. And so having Tyson Barrie instead of him it could be quite a dramatic change for the Edmonton Oilers. Adam Larsson, when he's healthy, is also not a bad puck-moving defenseman. And as the year progresses, if Chris Russell's puck-moving, and he's going to play the left side, obviously now, if his puck-moving, which is better on the left side, if that doesn't get better, he's going to be out of the lineup, and we're going to see a player, I think, like Koekkoek or Lundstrom. As for Klefbom being gone, we have Caleb Jones slotting in, so we're going to see solid puck moving from Caleb Jones there. So this was a huge issue on the Oilers. Dom identified it. Other people have identified it, and I think they've taken steps to remedy it.
With young Evan Bouchard waiting in the wings as well, and he may well see a significant amount of action in this upcoming season, and of course, puck movement, passing, and transitional play is a big part of his game. So whether, we're not sure exactly when he's going to be ready, but we do know that the kind of game that he brings, we'll see an improvement in Oilers' outlet passing for at bare minimum. He's a beautiful passer of the puck. The idea of any defenseman, let alone more than one, who's consistently able to deliver the puck onto the tape of McDavid, Draisaitl, or their line mates, uh, in a good attacking position in the neutral zone is music. We want to see that.
Bruce, the last little piece of unfinished business right now is Ethan Bear's contract.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I was thinking today, obviously I'd like to see Ethan Bear sign. I'd be happy if they could get him on a 3-year deal, use Clefbaum's money to hook him up longer. And maybe that's why this is stretching out a little longer than any of us would have hoped. My only other thought is it suddenly popped in my head, well, if Bear's not there, Bouchard's going to he'll be stepping into that role. And Bouchard's ready, and then I thought, oh, geez, if they're gonna ask him to replace Ethan Bear in the lineup, that could be trouble. Like that's like asking Justin Schultz to suddenly move into the top four as a rookie in the NHL and play those kind of minutes. And we all remember how that worked out horribly. So, but here's the thing: Evan Bouchard wouldn't be asked to do that. I mean, they have Tyson Barrie and Adam Larson. If those two players are healthy, they have veteran players who can play in the top four in Barrie and Larson. And all Bouchard would be asked to do would be the third pairing guy with Chris Russell as his partner and playing some power play minutes. And that, so I don't think this is yet a situation where the Oilers are looking for leverage, although leverage is a part of every contract negotiation. Evan Bouchard does give them that leverage and that confidence that if Ethan Bear's demands are unreasonable right now, well, maybe they'll say, well, we'll see how it goes for a while here, Ethan. I mean, we like you as a player, but there has to be a number that makes sense for both us and you. And I don't know, I don't really have a sense of if there is a major disagreement between Bear and the Oilers or not. It's hard to tell. Maybe it was just always a case of the Oilers waiting for Clefbaum, his status to be resolved, and then if there's extra money, then they could work out something more with Bear, and maybe they're just in the process of doing that right now. That's what I hope. So we'll see what happens there.
Now, Jason Greger of TSN 1260, he provided this update yesterday, being Sunday the 27th. So Ethan Bear update. His agent John Davidson and Oilers continue to have talks. 1, 2, and 3-year deals have been discussed. Talks have been cordial. They just disagree on money at this time. Bear is skating in Kelowna. To ensure he doesn't miss day one of training camp, then he needs to be in Edmonton at the following times. Either if he flies commercial, he needs to be in the city tonight, meaning last night now, so we'll hear if he's here or not. If he drives, and Kelowna is not considered a hot spot, and he doesn't go in any places, then he has to be in Edmonton by the 31st. So the clock is ticking, and it's ticking fast in terms of this turning from a contract negotiation into technically a holdout.
So all that's separating them is money. That's it, eh?
Yeah,
just money.
That's all. Money. But at least they're cordial. At least they're not.
That's something, right?
They're talking. They're not sort of in their own camps being mad at one another yet.
Bruce, Ethan, listen. He is a good NHL hockey player, Ethan Bear, and I hope they sign him.
Yep.
Evan Bouchard is ready for the NHL, I believe. He's played a year in the pros. He did very well. He's now had half or a third of a season in Sweden, where he's looked really good. Ethan Bear would be just well served to get as much money as he can in the next few days, whatever that is, and then sign that contract. That's all I'm saying about that. Because I'm not sure in the long run that Ethan Bear's a better player than Evan Bouchard. I think that's a real open question. And there is this competition that's going to be held this year between Bouchard, Bear, and Tyson Barrie for, I think, 3 guys competing for what I think are probably 2 jobs.
Yeah.
Or maybe they keep all 3. Maybe it's Adam Larson who will be leaving. That's a possibility too. But so let's say there's 4 guys. There's 4 guys competing for 3 jobs next year. And they're all really good hockey players in their own way, I believe. And we'll see how it plays out. Maybe injury is going to solve the question in the
they're
end.
all puck movers.
Except for Larson. But yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, if it's 4 guys competing for 3, then it's like the one, which might give Larson an edge, right? Because maybe you need that different player in the mix, depending on how much he's going to ask for. So it's just a really interesting situation. Like, I guess as an Oiler fan, should be happy, Bruce. For once at right defense, for once in how many years, we have all of this talent at right defense coming online already, and Michael Kesselring in the pipeline. Sam Marukov, who can play the right side, who plays the right side in the KHL, in the pipeline. The Oilers finally have some real competition for that spot. That's the good news. And I'm just hoping Ethan Bear can settle it. And I think he'd be really smart to sign a longer term contract, because that kind of gives him the leg up in terms of sticking around in the NHL.
Well, the Oilers have invested 5 years of development in Ethan Bear, and the players invested the same 5 years and made the development. And power to him, he turned into, arguably, he was the Oilers' best puck-moving defenseman last year.
He was.
So
he was, yeah.
In terms of the outlet pass and
so good with the puck every time it got on his stick, right? He made the right play almost every time. He was fantastic. I really liked the player. And he was pretty good on defense too, right? Like, not bad. Held his own in the
for
top
an NHL
4.
Rookie, he held his own, and he's still improving. I mean, we haven't seen the best that this player has to offer. He made a huge step last year, and hopefully another step to come. But he's a guy you want to have him signed and relatively happy, and at least some kind of understanding that if they have to short him this year, that he's in the plans, and that next year when a little cap space opens up, he'll still be in the plans, and he just has to deliver the goods. So
they don't have to short him this year, Bruce. I mean, they could go that option, right? The Oilers. But there is this other option now because of the Klefbom's contract situation and the money that opens up. So they can pay him over a 3-year. I mean, they could pay him if they want. They could go 5 years. They could try to get him on a longer term deal at this point, because that possibility is there now. Because next year they don't have the same cap. Like, even if Klefbom comes back next year and plays for the Oilers, they're covered in their cap situation. So, alrighty. Any final thoughts? Guess we'll be watching Holloway, hopefully, and Broberg, hopefully, for sure.
Broberg's scheduled to play today. They have Swedes are playing their second game on today, the 28th, that we're recording this, and the Oilers only have the 2 players in the tournament, but they have both high-profile first-round draft picks. So it's fun to watch, I guess my one final thought relates back to the article I wrote last night, that many of the players in this tournament are from the same pool that produced the 2018 Hlinka Gretzky Cup that was played in our city. And that was a U18 tournament before any of these guys had ever been drafted. And frankly, we hadn't heard of most of them. But as a U18 tournament, that was the cluster of 2001 birthdays. And now at this 2021, technically, World Junior, the 19-year-old class is 2001 birthdays. So it's the exact same pool. And I compared the rosters of the 8 Hlinka Gretzky teams, which are 8 of the 10 teams in the World Junior, and there's 77 players that are common to both tournaments. So we have many dozens of players who are not even visiting Edmonton or Rogers Place for the first time, but they've been developing as hockey players for the 2.5 years in between times, and most of them have been drafted by NHL teams. It's fun to see their progress and how this whole um, international tournament structure uh, uh, involves an entire class. And we were lucky in Edmonton to get that Linka Gretzky. Unfortunately, the 2020 version of that event was canceled in August completely. And of course, they were playing NHL playoffs in our building in August, as it turned out anyway. But uh, that was a very enjoyable tournament to attend, and it's fun to sort of be reaping the benefits, so to speak, years later. And that we have familiarity with these guys. We saw Philip Broberg in that tournament. We saw Dylan Holloway in that tournament in 2018. Now they're both Oilers first round picks.
One final note. I noted when there was this huge positive explosion about Broberg
Mm-hmm.
Broberg online on Saturday, I think it was, after when he was playing so well. I just thought back to the draft day when he was taken, and I did a Twitter Reacts story that day, Bruce,
Right. Mm-hmm.
about how many Oilers fans had reacted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was glad to see I had stuck to my guns, and I said, I'm not going to comment on this player. I haven't seen him play, so I'm just not going to say, I'm just going to wait. And, maybe that's kind of a boring thing to say repeatedly after players are drafted and trades are made. But as someone who's trying to take this a little bit seriously and be somewhat credible in my analysis, as an amateur hockey fan / talent observer, that's where I'm at. I'm just not going to do that anymore, where I weigh in heavily on a player I haven't seen. But person after person, I think, who hadn't seen him was doing that and saying, like, this is a terrible move by Holland. And there was lots and lots of criticism of Ken Holland that day. People profoundly disappointed in Holland for not drafting one of the top U.S. forwards, Cole Caulfield or Trevor Zegras or Philip Boldy. And those players are all also turning out very, very well. But it's nice to see that maybe Ken Holland wasn't such a big dum-dum after all and saw something in this player, which is now evident to pretty much everybody in the hockey world. Philip Broberg has a chance to be certainly to merit, if you can get a top 4 D-man out of a 8th overall pick, you've done pretty good. If you can get a first number 1 D-man, Bruce, or a top pairing D-man out of that pick, you've hit the jackpot.
Right.
And the Oilers are somewhere between doing very well and hitting the jackpot, I think, with Philip Broberg pick. So.
Yeah, I'm with you on the overreacting part when you haven't seen kids and you're just sort of, if you fall in love with a name or something you've seen or one highlight you've seen of a guy or something, and it becomes that guy or nothing or whatever, And I mean, some of the conclusions drawn about Ken Holland and his hockey and scouting knowledge seemed a little bit far-fetched given his tremendous track record over a very long period of time, but it's a passionate sport, and the fans are passionate too. So more power to them. I guess it's all about the discussion. But I prefer, as do you, to reserve judgment to some extent. And at this point, I'm pretty happy with Broberg's development, and obviously he's still got a long ways to go. And even the guys that were raving about him on Saturday took pains to say he's not NHL ready yet. It's going to be a bit like he's a work in progress, and so.
Yeah, it would be a pretty boring hockey world too if everyone was just undraftable. I'm on the fence about that. I just want to see this player more. I'm not going to say anything. Like if we all did that, like what I'm doing now, it would be that would be a little bit boring. You're right. People are passionate, and actually some of the people who were down on the Broberg pick had been watching all the players. Had been watching. I mean, and felt the Oilers. There was like Mark Edwards, who's a bright hockey guy. His I think they had him 21st overall that year, Broberg, and thought that was a reach of a pick, right? So there was lots of people who were very knowledgeable about these players, who saw them a lot, who also weren't that enthusiastic about them. So there's that. He seems to be warranting the bet that was made on him that day, is what I will say at this point. Like maybe there's going to be 5 or 6 or 7 players who were taken after him in the draft who turn out to be much better than he. in the NHL. Maybe one of those players will be Trevor Zegras, who's also looks like he's certainly warranting the bet that Anaheim, I think it was, made on him at 9th overall.
Mm-hmm.
Cole Caulfield looks fine as a prospect right now. So there could be lots of these players, but looks like Broberg so far is one of them where the bet seems to be in line with where the player was taken in the draft.
I know.
Bruce, thanks for talking today.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Cult of Hockey readers and listeners. And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.